Welcome to Upthinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here is your host, Emerson Fersch.
Welcome to another edition of Upthinking Finance. Winston Churchill said, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." Now, in my role as a certified financial planner, most of my conversations with clients revolve around investment strategies, setting retirement goals, how to prepare for future college expenses for their children, and planning for the unexpected calamities that can befall us from time to time. But generally, I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about the charitable aspects of their financial situation. And truth be told, I probably have learned more from my clients over the years in this regard than I've certainly been able to offer them. And as a result, I've been introduced to some just awesome people and excellent organizations in the local community, across the United States, and in some cases overseas. Today's guest is just one of these people. His name is Pastor Chris Hoke, and he was introduced to me by a client and a actual mutual friend of ours, Dan. Now, Chris is the co-founder and executive director of Underground Ministries, which serves to mobilize faith communities and businesses in the Pacific Northwest area by connecting them to men and women being released from prison with the objective of forming what he calls relationships of mutual spiritual transformation. He's also the creator of the One Parish, One Prisoner model and movement, which serves to empower churches to get more involved and, engage with what he refers to as the tombs that are the American incarceration system. And this movement actually serves a couple of purposes. It takes faith organizations, churches specifically, and connects them with an individual that is being released from prison. What this does is this helps this individual build a network outside of the prison system, which then ultimately, hopefully, results in him or her having the ability to overcome the significant barriers to reentry that exist in society. The other side of it, though, is it also really brings churches back to their roots, or at least in my view, what their primary purpose should be, which is to serve as places of healing and personal resurrection. Through Chris's work as a prison chaplain and pastor, working with gang members in the jail system up in the Skagit Valley area of Washington, he was able to help found the Underground Coffee Company with the collaborative efforts of a former meth cook and a local roaster, which not only served to provide jobs for individuals getting out of prison and also helping them apply skills they actually brought into the system, but also has probably the coolest company slogan you'll ever hear, which is interrupting mass incarceration one cup at a time. There has been a side benefit to this as well, as it's created a whole underground employers network, which has resulted in companies from a variety of different industries who specifically seek to hire releasing prisoners and those who are recovering from drug addiction. Chris has also written one of the best books I have ever read, top 5 for sure, called Wanted, A Spiritual Pursuit Through Jail Among Outlaws and Across Borders, and that's available on Amazon. And lastly, and probably most importantly, Chris is the husband and father and lives with his wife and 2 sons in the Mount Vernon area of Washington. So it's my pleasure to welcome my friend Chris Hoke, who's coming to us today from his in-laws' house in Spokane, Washington. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, it's great to be here, Emerson.
It's awesome. This is actually our first official time seeing each other. We usually talk on the phone. So, there's so much to talk about, and I think this particular topic is unique to say the least, because the truth be told, and I imagine this will come up in our discussion, but talking about working with prisoners, I think most people would just kind of like to keep that over here and go on with life. And so that's what I think is so engaging about this. So maybe if you don't mind, to get some background, how you really got involved in this work, working with within the prison system and this ministry.
Yeah. My story, and not to preach at anyone, but this is just my story. I grew up in a very churched home, and I was in church on Wednesday nights and Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings. And when you grow up in I'll use the word over-churched upbringing, you hear the stories of Jesus a lot. I mean, the way Don Quixote, he reads the stories of the knights errant and the slain dragons. He reads these books so often he goes mad, and all he sees around him are, dragons and damsels in distress. So I think I heard these stories so often. The only story that made sense to me is, how do we do the Jesus stuff? And being in a church growing up, they use the phrase, raise your hand if you want to follow Jesus. My hand was up every time, like, hell yeah. But I learned over time, like, oh, they don't mean raise the dead and walk from village with religious people and have dinners with the outcasts. They mean be a good boy and keep coming back to church. Follow Jesus' code. So I got pretty disillusioned with the church growing up and found my way into some rough neighborhoods up the west coast in Oakland, and then far up in the northwest Washington. So I grew up in Southern California, and I found my way up here in northwest Washington with the work with a group of theologians who are among undocumented migrant farm workers picking strawberries and cucumbers in the fields, families from southern Mexico, and doing a lot of theological study in a little jail. I thought, that's where I want to study the Bible. And so in that jail, there were young men who were my age in their early 20s, and they were funny, and they were open about their anger, and they didn't have to watch their language like I did in church. And they asked brilliant questions about God and suffering, and they knew where the tax collectors and prostitutes are and the meth cooks in their valley. And so that was an exciting place not only to read the Bible, but these guys who were in gangs. I never knew anything about gangs. I was like in all my AP classes in high school. These guys became friends, and they invited me to come visit them and continue the conversations outside of the Bible study groups. So they'd be like, hey, we're going to do a pastor visit. I'm like, I'm not a pastor, but sure. And so we'd talk till 10 p.m. until the guards would rap on the door. And I had the most wonderful conversations, Emerson, like with these guys that I never had at high school, never had in my church youth group. Guys talking about funny stuff, open-hearted prayers, like not just let's be good and bow our heads, like weeping and holding my hands over the table, weeping the loss of their own kids, their own mother who died, and unspeakable trauma, incredible abuse they'd been through. And that was a depth of just human connection, of laughter, of tears, and them saying, hey, well, I'm going to call you when I get out, but they never would. I'd only hear from them when they'd go off to prison. So either they'd get out and they'd be out on the streets, and I wouldn't hear from them much because they would just be lost in homelessness and addiction, gang violence, or they'd go off to prison and they'd start to write me long, incredible letters when they were sitting in solitary confinement. And so that was the beginning of my work. I thought it'd be a couple years in the jail, but they started calling me their pastor, and I stopped fighting. I'm like, all right, I'm not ordained, but maybe God ordained me from below, from the streets. And so I became a gang pastor, and the journey continued as many men, their transformation happened when they were in prison, and they had enough time and enough hope and connection with me or others to plan a different kind of release, to not just go back to their homies or their girlfriends, but they had a whole year to kind of put a plan together and find good housing and write long letters to access their heart and who they really were underneath their gang identity or their drugs. And so that's how a lot of those stories are in that book that you read, Wanted. But since then, I've been in the game for 17 years now. We started Underground Ministries 5 years ago as a platform to help businesses and churches do what we do across Washington State and beyond now, to kind of create a reentry culture of people being in relationship with someone in prison and walking with them as they come out of the tombs of prison. And we like to call that a way to practice resurrection.
That book, Wanted, that you wrote, it was transformational for me because my experience, I wasn't raised in church, but I found that in my particular faith, I sort of kept getting put in leadership positions, and oftentimes found that a lot of the focus was on sort of just all the administrative stuff and just a lot of, as you said, appearances and meetings. But as I studied and got to learn about Christ, I really realized that, this isn't where he's not sitting in a meeting talking about illuminating problems. He's out with the people. And your book really hit home. There was a story that you shared about a guy, I think is it Noe? Is that how you pronounce it? Noe?
Mm-hmm.
And you were, the short of it is, because people need to read the book, but I mean, maybe I shouldn't even share it so people do read the book because,
No, go ahead and share it.
well, it was just this guy who had tried to kill himself, as I recall, had robbed somebody, was like wired on meth, but effectively just felt like a complete, failure. He had no hope. And you were brought in, you met with him, and you basically convinced him, which I think is the miracle in of itself, to get on his knees and talk to God. And he got this message, something along the lines of "You're the one." He, couldn't believe it. He didn't know, why am I the one? And then, this gets me emotional every time. But the lesson of it is you're the one because you're the one that's on your knees praying to God tonight. Broken down homie, I think is what it was. That had been doing all this horrible stuff, and that was so. In that book was many of those lessons that God will go to anybody who seeks. He's not waiting for us to show up, dressed in our suit and tie on a Sunday. He'll go to anybody whose heart is seeking him. And I think that's just what I took out of it. And I'm guessing, because I guess the question to kind of what you said to this point is, I think a lot of people, again, and myself included, until I really got to know you, and even I'm still on the outskirts of this, in terms of my involvement with your work, but this idea that people don't change, that they are officially hopeless, and if you're in prison, you belong there. I mean, this, and I don't mean, I know this sounds harsh, but this is, I think, probably how a lot of people feel, and I know, quite frankly, I felt in my life. And then because of you, Dan, bringing me to you, it's opened my heart, and reading that book really opened my heart to realize that, God doesn't abandon any of his children.
Yeah, through that book, you tell enough stories, and some of the imagery starts to connect in ways that I hadn't expected. But there was this story where I'm doing a Bible study with these homeless youth, and they were talking about being locked inside of a dumpster. Like a large dumpster was the cleanest, driest place in the university area, where some restaurants or coffee shops would keep like the cardboard to be recycled. It was warm and dry in there, but they'd get locked in there in the dumpster. And they were pretty upset about that. And that image started to keep coming up in other stories about prisons as a human dumpster. And I think what we do with our trash in our culture, especially, like America has a unique problem with incarceration. It's not just something that's historical or in every country. We have a way off the Richter scale relationship with, it's what we call mass incarceration. Like 8 times as much as is the second or third place of incarcerating per capita in the developed world. It's immense. And I think we have a culture of disposability. We want single use stuff. We want a TV has a little bit of a line in it or a problem, and we don't fix it. We throw it away. We call it broken. And I think people have wounds. People have incredible suffering, and we say, well, that person's broken. It's easier to just throw them away. And our prison landfill system, our human landfill system, is just bursting. And you go in there and you realize there's some amazing human beings here, and if you believe in healing, and you start to see how many beautiful human beings are ready to accept healing, are ready to accept and embrace, and are ready to come back into the community, become a mom, become a dad, become a friend. It's just an incredible waste of humanity, and yet it's an incredible discovery of new friends and the magic of healing, and maybe the discovery that God's in the healing business and the resurrection business, not the disposal business.
I think your work, our mutual friend Dan, he actually originally kind of got me involved with working with the homeless, and even the way, even saying that the homeless, there's a label, there's a distance, there's a separation,
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
I learned through not just donating money but also time, and of that, they're people with names, with a story. And that changes, that's where the compassion comes in. And so I just, I really appreciate it, admire the work you do. And so, and we'll get back into this a little bit, but I want to have you talk about the other side, because clearly what you're doing is, you're doing the Lord's work, you're saving souls, and you're going into the, what is it in the Great Supper, but the streets and the lanes and the streets and the bushes and the highways, the different parables. But the Lord always talks about, the people, the original group's invited, they don't want to come for whatever reason. Everybody's got a reason why they don't want to go to the table. And then he seeks out all the people on the margins, the fringes. And I mean, I don't know if there's much more of a margin or fringe in the world than what you're talking about, which is the prison system. But you do important work. But there's another side to working in nonprofit, and that is sort of this administrative side. This, which of course there can be a conflict with, the real calling at hand. And so maybe we could share some of that, because I think that's interesting to listeners. And I don't think, even myself, I don't know that I really have a real grasp on just how the balancing act that goes on.
Yeah, I mean, a nonprofit organization is a business still, right? Like, its purpose is not to gain profits or to make money for its shareholders, but it still is an organization that has staff and that has to manage resources and programs and delivery and deliverables. And so oftentimes folks like in my, I won't say line of work, folks like me who are going out and doing, whether it's working with folks with disabilities or in the healing professions with people coming out of sex trades or individuals coming home from war or out of prison, it takes so much work to be able to know how to do that well. And then you start a small nonprofit to kind of give some legitimacy and some structure to do it full time. But then I think a lot of folks like me get to the point that we are now at Underground Ministries that the skill set that got me here is different than the skill set that's required now, which is like a nonprofit manager, like a business experience. And so I've been grateful for our mutual friend Dan, who's a businessman, and others that have come alongside and seen the good work we do and not expected us to run like a business. I mean, maybe would like to help us, grow in that way, but there's a lot of, we were talking about this last week, Emerson, that there's a lot of competition among nonprofits in kind of like a capitalist society to kind of compete for dollars and to put a lot of energy into marketing and storytelling and donor care, as if we're here to take care of our clients, which are donors, instead of we're doing the work out there and hopefully people can support us to do that work out there. I'm interested in our time here today to talk a little bit with folks who are tuning in to chat with you and listen to you, Emerson, about finance and business, to kind of both talk about the specifics of Underground Ministries as well as from the perspective of someone running a nonprofit, both how we are wanting. I'm learning so much this year about nonprofit management and finance and projections and income streams, revenue streams, but also wanting to kind of dispel maybe some myths and maybe challenge some assumptions in the world of folks that have who are very resource rich, that maybe are relatively wealthy and they have resources to give, but there's a lot of kind of attitudes or assumptions out there about how to give that I don't find very helpful on the donation recipient side of someone trying to run a nonprofit. So we want to dive into that a little bit. I think it'd be really fun.
No, let's do it, because like I said, the average person, again, I'll put myself in there, you don't really think about that side of it. It's just, you see the cause, you see the purpose, and that's kind of swallows up, that's your image. But the reality of it is like a good financial plan, people need to save and invest and be consistent and true to that plan. And it's sort of the same thing with, picking organizations that you want to work with is you can't just dip your foot in and expect, it's like for me, if somebody comes in and they decide they're going to put 10 grand away and they're expecting to retire on $1 million in 20 years. I mean, I may be good, but I'm not that good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the same thing, but with the systematic, consistent, disciplined effort, I always equate kind of what I do to like a marriage, you're in or you're out. And anyway, so yeah, if you want to elaborate a little bit on some of your experiences, I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, you nailed it right there, Emerson, that I've been surprised over the years when I've spoken with a number of folks in church lobbies at after giving like a keynote address or something at a conference, that how many people, if it were one or two people, but it's a pattern I've heard, that I've heard a number of people come forward and say they're really excited to tell me about their giving philosophy. It's like they've spent more time reading books or developing a giving philosophy than talking about the work that we're trying to support. But I've heard an iteration of this several times that, like, we don't like to create dependence. And so my wife and I, we like to give in 3-year stints. And we kind of cycle through and we discern every 3 years and we pick new givers and maybe reach out to me in a couple years when we're at that 3-year cycle. And so I'm kind of making a composite example right now between hearing several people that have said this, but I've thought about that a lot, and I've felt like, well, I'm glad for you and your wife like your philosophy, but if you're going to talk to the folks you're giving with, like, that feels like a real punch in the gut, to say, we want to just give in cycles. Like, that's not how a relationship works. That's not how good investing works. And folks like me on the nonprofit side, like, we got into this to do the work we're trying to do with folks with incredible pain and develop solutions and healing and health in our communities. And we know we have to do some fundraising and building relationships with donors. But if everyone were on that philosophy, what a terrible world it would be. If everyone started giving every 3 years, that means you're making every nonprofit double their overhead and their fundraising and their marketing department to go over and constantly trying to develop new relationships and new donors, rather than building on a solid budget of people that are saying, hey, and keep us in touch, tell us stories, write your newsletters, stay in touch with us sometimes. We want to feel connected, of course. But if there's not a problem, just on principle, breaking up every 3 years and dating around just feels so, that has to serve the giver, and that does not, that's not a partnership, and that's not real giving for organizations doing the work. Like, for me, there's a few, it actually, from in the book, Demerson, those 2 trips in Guatemala, there's Donacio and there's Shorty, and for 13 years, my wife and I give to them, and I don't need to read their newsletters. I like to, but I'm not treating it like a consumer relationship. Like, I'm here to get a bump of a good feeling. I believe in the work they've done. I trust them. And so unless our budget changes or there's a real shift in our values, I hope to be giving them to them in 15 more years, because they're miracles. Their work is miraculous. It's small, it's gritty. They don't need a marketing department to kind of like woo me again every year and a half. I believe in their work, and I want them to not worry about their budget so they can worry about the people that are coming out of gangs in the slums. And so I'm on board for them for a decade, and I hope to for decades to come. And I don't know, I hope that more folks who are giving would approach giving that way, is to find some places you really want to invest and be in it for the long haul, like a mutual fund.
Yeah. Perfect. No, you know what though? And that's kind of one of the reasons I started this podcast, and I've really, the meaning of the work I do. There was a time when I started this company in 96 or 95. And, I often wondered, what's the value of what I do? And I've gone through a few iterations, being a reliable person that tries to be honest with everybody and do what's right to the extent you can. And just be open-minded to new ideas. But what it's really come down to over the years is what you said. It's the relationships. And I mean, I have relationships with people like Dan and his family and a lot of other clients where it's just, it's a friendship, and, we're living life together. And I think you and I talked about this, whenever it was a week or two ago, because when, well, actually, I'm trying to remember when there was the financial downturn, and we had to start looking at, personally as well as through the company, where we were sending money, because I've always believed it's important to give to the community. But I guess maybe what you're talking about is a transition from this is a deduction on my 1040 to why am I actually involved, and what do I believe, and how do I find organizations that fit that belief system? And so, as my wife and I went through kind of a gleaning process and continue to, the work you do, honestly, is at the top of the list, because I've learned through my own experience, and part of it's been through service in church, that, it's like you said, I want to be like, I know that sounds crazy to say on a financial podcast, but I want to be like Jesus. I mean, that example is it, and when I really dug into scriptures, and I wasn't, like I said, raised with it, but started reading the parables and watching what he did and how he interacted, how he treated people. I mean, you're right in the heart of it. That's where he goes. He goes to the people that are suffering. He always goes to the pain. He doesn't, and I think I mentioned this before. So I think you're right. It has to be viewed as a relationship and a commitment. And so I like knowing that I'm working with organizations and people like you that actually do reflect who I am and the person and kind of the difference I want to make in the world. So my hope is that too, as people get some exposure to you, because I mean, it took reading a book, it took being introduced to through a mutual friend, and truthfully, I didn't really, it was a recommendation. I thought, yeah, this makes sense. I kind of do that a lot. I'll just do something because it falls into my lap and feels right, but then later, the intellectual side of it kicks in to where, yeah, this is right. This resonates. It fits with who I am and where I am in my life. So, can you maybe elaborate on some of the challenges specific to the ministry, aside from this administrative side of it and trying to just, manage a business, like you said, so that you can really spend your time, in the highways and the byways, so to speak, what are some issues that you run into specifically with your work with Underground Ministries?
Well, Underground Ministries in the last few years has really put all of our hope, all our eggs in our basket in this vision called One Parish, One Prisoner. There's roughly in Washington State, when the book came out, I was speaking in a lot of different churches or Christian colleges or conferences, and there would be the Q&A of people saying, "What can we do?" Like we've heard some of the stories we hear, about this kind of messy and mysterious work of men and women changing in prison and new lives. But what can we do other than reading the book or sending a check? And I didn't really have a good answer. But then as I'm working with guys, for instance, I work in a Skagit County in the far northwest of Washington State. But guys would go off to prison. That's a state system. And so a lot of their cellies, their cellmates and guys on the tier would be from different parts of the state. And so they'd be putting them in relationship to me. They're like, well, this guy gets out in Tacoma, this guy gets getting out in Spokane. And we couldn't drive all over the state to help them walk through their reentry work. We could do the kind of underground work of letter writing and kind of tending to them spiritually and when they're deep in the tomb system. But we couldn't be their reentry team all over. So I'm like, wait a minute, I'm preaching in this church in Tacoma, which is like 3 hours drive from our house. And there's a guy coming home next week. We're going to be down here next week helping this guy get set up, but we'll just be here for an afternoon before we have to drive home. What if the folks in this church were the ones who have been in relationship with this guy for the last year? Because if he just came out tomorrow, he's not going to go hit up some church folks and just say, hi, here's who I am, help me. But if they were writing letters with him for a year and building a release plan, that would be great. And so that's when someone gave us that stat that there's roughly the same amount of churches. And we thought, well, then we just need to put together a pairing system and a light training system. And so we went from 3 to 9. I think we just paired our 33rd church and releasing individual pairing in Washington State last week. And I'm out here in Spokane actually recruiting and talking with more pastors in the area. And so that's our work right now, is helping. Like if you were in Washington State, Emerson, I'd be talking with you in your community, whether you're involved with the church or kind of like a home group, and looking at, do you want to go on an adventure of 2 years with 7 other people in your parish, so to say, and be in relationship with one person and be writing letters and going out to visit them wherever their facility is and putting a release plan together and accompanying them and rolling away the stones of the tombs. That's our metaphor for all the bureaucratic structural barriers of driver's licenses and housing, and so many barriers in the modern world that people coming out of the underground of having a felony record or being in prison and having no resources. Would you want to go on this adventure for 2 years with someone? That's what we're doing right now. And so what's cool is that I don't know if I'd say it's taken off. It feels like it's not a hard sell, that folks are saying yes. But the problem now is logistics, is business. Is how do we sustain this? And so I've been asking questions with our team about how do we maybe charge a little bit for the journey, which I thought I would never do. But that's the only way this is going to sustain, because the staffing on our end to do the pairing and the recruiting and the building the learning modules. But we found that churches are really fine paying for like a one-time tuition. They pay for like video series or programs or Bible studies. So that's cool, but I'm needing to lean on not just folks who are wise in addiction and relationship and reentry. Like that's my wheelhouse. I've been writing all the curriculum, but how do we go from 33 churches, which is really nothing, if we're looking at 2.4 million people in America who are incarcerated? And so I'm wanting to talk with logistics folks and someone like Dan, our friend, who looks at how do you mobilize numbers across and put solutions together across an entire state and mobilize multiple denominations and individuals and emails and storytelling and getting them resources they can tell the story locally. Um, that's the business that I'm up against now, and wanting to realize, do I figure this out myself? Do I write grants and hire people that can do this? These are business questions now.
So let me ask you this, because I'm surprised actually that you say you that you sounds like you've run into some really willing souls, and again, I'm being candid. I just lay it out there, but I know the idea of writing to a prisoner. The first thoughts that go through my head is, what if this person gets out? Maybe I've watched too many episodes of Criminal Minds. I don't know, but
Oh yeah,
there's
you probably have.
right. No, I know, and
Go watch that.
I'm being honest because I think this is things that a lot of people would think about. Is there's a fear element there, and I'm sure that's absolutely 100% part of the problem. But what do you say to maybe some people that feel, just uncomfortable just because of maybe conditioning or just the way, the whole system's portrayed, and you know what I'm saying?
Sure, I think I'd say the folks that are that afraid probably aren't reaching out to us, or they're not the one kind of volunteering in the church. But I think a lot of communities understand the call to work with the incarcerated. Yeah, at least in churches, that's a big thing, especially when Jesus says, one of his whole last, final day, judgment day parables is about, you visited me when I was in prison. And people say, Lord, when you were in prison. He says, whenever you did this for the least of these, you did it. You were doing it with me. And so I think at least in the church world, and I'm working up with some rabbis and some imams now as well, and that throughout the Abrahamic faiths, we know this is what traditions, our values gear us towards. We know, especially in America right now, there's a tipping point. There's an awareness that mass incarceration has failed. This is a huge, big government solution failure. And that we've put so many people that have mental health struggles in prison. We've put so many people with addictions in prison. Um, I think enough people are 1 or 2 degrees away from an incarcerated friend, and their son is locked up, or their niece is doing some time. I think there's an awareness that this is our own community who's locked in there, and we just don't know what to do. Those are the attitudes we're encountering of people kind of getting it on some degree and wanting to get involved. But so let me speak to the fear part, because I think it's a paradox. I think some people in their macro level values, so to say, are like, yeah, we want to help the incarcerated. We want to help people come home. But there's that fear. And so one of maybe our eighth or ninth church, it was a very kind of social justice, let's get involved, activist church. So they said yes right away. And then one of the most kind of activist leading women in the church got on the team, and she kind of rallied the team together. But sure enough, after we paired them with someone, we say, now you have their name, you can Google them if you want. You can try to find out their past. We don't recommend it. Uh, what if we could Google the worst things you've ever done? If it was online, would you want me to hit enter and look it up, or would you rather that I just kind of dealt with you first? And so that was her challenge. And she reached out to me and she said, "I be honest, Chris, I Googled him, and I'm really excited about this. And sure enough, he has domestic violence charges." I said, "Yeah." She said, well, that's going to be complicated for me. I said, "Okay. Do you want to talk about it?" And so we had coffee. And she said, "So basically, Chris, I haven't really talked about this with many people. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I have experience in those things." What, domestic violence? A lot of quiet. Yes. Do you want to tell me more about it? We're out here for coffee. Well, she goes back, she tells me a long story about growing up in a home where her dad was very abusive, and watching her dad, she and her sisters watching her dad hit her mom. viciously, often, and they were all in fear. But on the outside, they were the model family in the neighborhood. Turns out he was a leader in the church. Turns out he was a leader in the church denomination that church is still. So she's still part of this world.
Wow.
And she's pretty teary talking about the fear that she's carried in her life and the anxiety that she still lives with day to day. And she's like, so I didn't think I would be scared, Chris, because like my politics are such that I'm aware that the demographics who end up in prison, they deserve a fair chance. But this topic is going to be really hard for me. I don't think I'm the right person to be on this team. And then she'd go back into telling more of her story. And I said, hey, why would you not tell the story? I mean, I know the answer to this, but I wanted her to put some words to it. Why would you not tell this? This is your church, right? She says, no, I wouldn't. Nobody knows this in our church. But you're talking about it now. How does it feel? She wipes her eyes. It's good. It does feel good to talk about this. And these things are real, Chris. And she kind of like a burst of passion and pain came out. These are real and people need to be talking about this. I'm like, so isn't it interesting that no matter how many book groups or prayer groups have been in your church, you've never been able to open up some of the most significant wounds of your life until you've been connected with someone coming home from prison who has charges he can't hide about this. Is it possible that this opening up of our own church is thanks to a relationship with someone who has those same stories, but they can't hide it? And sure enough, so she said, okay, I want to do this. Maybe this would be good for me. Maybe this would be good for our church. Bingo. And so I started reflecting on that story a lot, that I think a lot of us, whether in churches or just haven't been incarcerated, we've got skeletons in the closet. We've got incredible pain. And maybe we've just done better at functioning, at moving forward in our lives, hiding it. But I think we all need some healing as well. And I think a lot of the folks in prison, that their story and their charges might be just the shape of the key that can unlock our basements and closets and help liberate in our stories.
No, it's kind of ironic you bring this up, because what comes to my mind is how we're all connected. You know, how at the end of the day, we're all breathing the same air. You know, we're living on the same planet, and there's some kind of a spiritual link that we pulls us together. Actually, I did an interview with a hedge fund manager over in Monaco last month, and I was drawn to him not because of his business, futures trading acumen. It was because he wrote an article. He writes a blog and he talks about a lot of personal stuff. And one of them was, is just this idea that this connection is how we all sort of ascend together. So,
did you say we all ascend together?
Yeah, we're all ascending together. We need each other. So
yes,
it's kind of funny, hedge fund manager in Monaco, a prison minister in Washington, and
Yeah, I like that. I mean, like, that's our language. I mean, that's theological language of the ascent. There's the descent into the tombs, and the resurrection is the ascent. I like that we ascend together, and I think our healing and going to the next level is only if we can descend into our shit, so to say. We can descend into our stories and our pains and our wounds, and that helping this person come home and deal with his story is how this church is going to heal, and how this woman is healing. And I think that she and this guy, he's been home 2.5 years now, and they're doing great, and they're friends.
Wow.
And I'd say they're ascending together.
No, that's great. And I think, you just kind of shared a story, but I think it's always good, if I was to ask you to just maybe, as we kind of wind down, just share maybe something. If I were to ask you, a success story of the ministry, is there something that really comes to mind that just kind of sort of embodies, everything you've been doing and are currently doing?
Yeah, I really like that last one. I mean, and the story just continues, right? Maybe I'll just stay with that one. That church ended up inviting a different program to come and lead a workshop on making churches safe for survivors of domestic violence, and helping staff handle situations well and see the signs when someone's trying to reach out and there's violence in the home. And that's thanks to this guy coming home. This guy was also one of the young women on the team, volunteered, and she was like a homeschooling mom. And so at first she was like, what do I have to do? I mean, what do I have in common with gang members and these guys? But something's telling me I need to do this. And sure enough, on her first letter, she didn't know what to write. So she's like, I'm just going to put it all out there. I've dealt with a lot of mental health issues in my life. When I was in my 20s, I was in a health facility locked down for 3 months. No one knows this. I look like the model homeschool organizing parent on the outside, but I've got a lot of anxiety. I've dealt with suicidal ideation. And if you're going to write with me, then I'm just going to put it all out there. That's me. And I don't have any answers. And I feel like I'm going to fail you. And I don't know how to help someone come home from prison, but that's me. And he wrote back and he's like, damn, girl, that's, I can relate to all of that. I wasn't going to tell everyone on the team, but I've been given a number of mental health diagnoses. And I don't know if they're all accurate or not. And I'm on a lot of meds in here and I don't know what to do about it, but I don't want to like scare the church that I'm a crazy guy. But damn, I feel like this is an answer to prayer that I can just be real about my shit. And so so she's like, I'm not good at writing and I'm busy with the kids, but let's do phone calls. And so every Sunday afternoon he would call, and that's how they built their connection. And they started calling each other mental health buddies, that they could laugh about these things together. And I think that's what I want. I think that's how we undo mass incarceration, is when we see that our stuff and the stuff in prison is the same, and we don't need to be afraid of it because it's the same stuff as us. It's just maybe a little bit more of it. And that we see that wall between us and them is invented, and that through stories and through laughter and through confession, we start to heal together. And now that she's had better conversations with him coming home from prison than anyone in the homeschooling group or in her church ever.
I believe
and
that.
The church is now jealous about it. Oh, now the church is wanting to say, oh, what's I want to have a story like that. What's my stuff I can share? And we're flipping the story about what's enviable and about what kind of relationships we want. If we can do that en masse, even if some guys come home from prison and their pain is so great they don't get it on the first try and they go back, that's all right. But if we can start opening those relationships and make stories like that the new norm, I'll die happy, man.
Well, it's kind of funny. I was thinking, listening to you, that, you've got a person who's physically in prison and you have a woman who is in her own prison. You just couldn't see the bars. I listen to these, and I've experienced not similar situations in my life. And it hasn't come from sitting in Sunday school or sitting in another church meeting. It's always been out with people, taking that risk, following that spiritual prompting and just getting out. And so I really, Chris, Pastor, I got to call you Pastor at least once in this conversation. But
Pastor who cusses.
Hey, you know what? The real deal. I think
you'll have to forgive me.
No, you know what? You don't need to be. I'm not in a position to do any forgiving. I just love you, brother. I think you're great and you're real. And I think that's I've always been drawn to that, because I look at the Savior and I think he gets painted up as this meek, helpless person sometimes. That was always just docile, and I look at him, and this guy was a revolutionary. He was a fighter. He had a mission, and he never backed off. He had moral courage. And you just, like I said, I know that the spiritual experiences I've had in life have been, and I remember one time, it's sort of just kind of along the same vein, but I was up. We used to go up to Skid Row with this church over in Carson, and we go up. They had this thing called Midnight Soldiers. We go up once a month at midnight, and hand people while they're sleeping in their tents, hygiene kits and water and food and blankets and whatever. But we talked to people, and I remember we'd have prayers. I mean, it was always this kind of just this thing. You're standing in the middle of the street at night, and as you know, midnight in the Bible has some, significance. The parable of the 10 virgins, and then there's the one, the friend that comes over and knocks at the one guy's door, the midnight caller. But it's like the hour where, hope is all exhausted, right? And then, of course, so that was the idea, we'd show up, and I'd have, sometimes you'd be standing in the street having a prayer with people, and here behind you are the monuments to capitalism in LA, right? These huge office buildings, and you're standing down there, like you said, in the tombs, and sometimes the eyes, you'd look at people in the eyes and you'd see that spirit in them, and those are the experiences. And so I think to just kind of back this all out, and this is I think the lesson in all this is, for me, it's not just writing a check, because I know, as we've got to know each other, the work you're doing. And Dan shared with me those trips in Utah, those retreats you do. And I've seen the look on some of those brothers' faces who've never they've never been in the woods. They've never seen all this open space. I mean, it's healing work. And so I think that's maybe the encouragement I would say for anybody, clients that are listening and just people in general who want to get involved, is to find I don't even like to call it a cause because that sounds so, but a mission, a heroic vision is really what you're talking about. It's a heroic vision to change not only the world, but to save souls. I guess that's really what it gets down to. And when you find that, you go all in with it. I'm thinking about that interaction you had with that woman, this conversation over coffee. And you know what? If you're having to spend time on the phone trying to get in, next month's rent, that conversation doesn't happen because you're busy doing something else. That's, I think, the thing that I hope people take out of this, is that if we can help, people like you do what you're best at, then, this world's going to change. And I'm just thankful to be a part of it in a little small way that I am.
Yeah, that would be my pitch to your network who's listening here today, Emerson. Is, I mean, I'm not going to say 10% because the Bible says. I just think it's a good number.
It's easy to remember.
Like that verse, whether you like that verse where it's drawn from in the Hebrew scriptures or not, I just think the idea of 10% of what we of as just kind of like a healthy check against the excesses of capitalist consumption and selfishness. If you just set aside, because this is what my wife and I do, instead of being like, well, do we feel generous this week? It doesn't work that way. Like mutual fund, right? It's just like, this is auto draw from our account. Here's the number. We just said, ooh, this is a big bite, but long term, this is going to be good for us. 10%, we just set it aside. What is it? What's our income every year? Okay, 10%. Now, how do we want to invest this? And then it gets exciting to think, this is a good chunk of money here. And are there a couple organizations, or even just people, just individuals out there that we just really believe in? And how can we have fun long-term investing this part of our finances and seeing the world grow in the direction that we want it to grow? And so if you have an organization out there that you already believe in, you read their newsletter and you like it, and you kind of hit archive when they send their appeal out, I just encourage you to sit down with a number in your household, look at 10%, and say, how can I use 10% of my income to move the world an inch closer to my values? And that go and visit that organization and spend time with them and say, hey, what would it look like if we started giving it this amount? We want to start at least at a 5-year. We'll kind of like check in with you and see if it's still with us. We want you to just be able to plan on that. There's our dent we can put in your budget. And we just want to learn from y'all and get involved and bring the kids sometimes if we can. We don't want to get in the way. But to just have fun with that, and that make it an important part of your life. And it's gonna open your eyes. It's gonna expand your heart, and be generous. I don't know there's many people who are sitting on their deathbeds who regret being generous. I thought, you know what? I gave too much away.
Yeah.
I think most people have the opposite regret, and they've just got a crap ton of money saved up, and they're really wise with it, but it was half wisdom. They were numbers wisdom, but they didn't have existential wisdom about what do I want to do with this wealth. And so I just encourage you to have fun and not wait to your deathbed to start investing in what you want to see heal in the world.
And I like what you said about it's exciting, and it is exciting, and it should be fun. And it broadens purpose. That's kind of what I opened with, is how many times do I have conversations really about people and their charitable, donations or their philanthropic work, whatever you want to call it. And not often, I know it's there because I got to know clients who share all the different things they do, like Dan did in introducing us. But it is exciting. And then you feel that the work, my showing up in this office and helping my clients, it just broadens that out even further. It's not just to make a car payment or to put more money away for my son's college or whatever. There's you're engaged in the world. So I've really enjoyed this, Chris. This was just an awesome conversation. You're just a great person. And if people want to find out more, I've already mentioned they can find the book Wanted on Amazon and a few other places. But if they want to get a hold of you, I know you've got a couple of websites. Am I right?
Yeah, a primary one is just undergroundministries.org, O-R-G, Underground Ministries. And we just have a URL shortcut to our main program, One Parish, One Prisoner. You can also just do One Parish, One Prisoner.org, and that'll just take you right to that page. But check out undergroundministries.org if you're moved by what you're hearing today, or if you want to give. And this might be, we might be part of your generosity portfolio. We would love to help put your resources to healing work, and maybe one person prisoner will reach your state soon. Help us get there sooner.
Generosity portfolio. Okay, so you're going to steal the Ascent. I'm going to borrow that. That's great. I love that. That's perfect. Chris, God bless you, brother. God bless your family. And thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Emerson. This is awesome.
Emerson Fersh is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisor services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from Capital Investment Advisors. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.